The EPNoSL virtual platform, or VIP, allows different actors of school leadership, school heads, teachers, trainers, academic experts, policy makers, practitioners, or even parents to interact, share, and learn through a series of webinars. You will find the full program of the virtual platform at the EPNoSL portal. If you click on www.schoolleadership.eu and then click on the EPNoSL VIP button, webinars are open to anyone interested. Our topic today is distributed leadership, and we are going to address this topic with the help of three speakers, Tanja Westfall-Greiter and Meyer Schratz from Austria, and Philip Woods from the UK. Today we are going to have two moderators, Jens Bolhöfer and of Educational Policy, Democracy and Leadership at the University of Hertfordshire, UK. He's chair of the British Educational Leadership Management and Administration Society, BELMA, a fellow of the RSA and a member of the US-based New Deal Democratic Ethical Educational Leadership Network. Prior to his current academic position, he has had chairs at the universities of the West England, Aberdeen and Gloucestershire. Currently, Professor Woods is also a scientific committee member and partner lead in the European Policy Network on School Leadership, EPNoSL. So now I would like to give the floor to Philip.
And on work that the network has been undertaking these past couple of years. The topic of the toolset is distributed leadership for equity and learning. And I'm going to show you a video scribe a little bit later on that links to the toolset, which gives an insight into what we mean by distributed leadership for equity and learning. And I'm also going to give a little bit of insight into where that idea has come from and what it means before presenting that video scribe. There's a number of influences that have fed into this conceptualization, this definition of distributed leadership for equity and learning. First of all, there, which you'll see on the slide, is the recognition that sustained success in an organization, schools and other organizations, requires leadership that involves everybody. The idea of relying on a single heroic leader or even a small elite of leaders that have that charismatic leadership quality isn't really going to give sustained success. There's a lot of research that points to that. There's a lot of experience that reinforces that. And so this means that for schools, you need to think about leadership as coming from people other than the head teacher, the principal, even the senior leaders around the principal and head teacher. The teachers, students, support staff all have a contribution to make to leadership. The second point is that the values that inform distributed leadership need to be made explicit. They need to be made clear. And there are values to do with social justice, to do with cooperation, and the values underpinning democratic citizenship that has informed a lot of work that I've been doing and that Amanda has been doing and that we've been looking at in recent years. And it's important to bring those in a clear and specified way to the development of distributed leadership. There's research that supports that as well. There's research into things like innovation in organizations, which shows that it works best where you have a wide range of people involved, where you have a perspective from different points of view within an organization or within a network. Innovation that is confined to just one person or a small group that doesn't bring in other views of how it's working or how it might be improved doesn't work as well. And This applies to the private sector, it applies to the public sector as well. One study of the private sector concluded that where you have effective innovation and sustained innovation, then it has to be done democratically, and coined the phrase democratic innovation. This underpins or reinforces the values, and of course the values stand in their own stead. They are important in their own right as well. The third route that sort of feeds into the work of this tool set is the theme that the European network identified in its work. It made a decision a couple of years ago that the theme of equity in learning would run through all of its work. And this meant that in developing the tool set, then it reinforced the need to put to the fore that it was about equity. And the fourth route that feeds into this work is a recognition that where distributed leadership is tried out, where it's developed, where it's working even to some degree, there are a lot of challenges and problems with it. It is not a straightforward thing to implement. It often sounds as if it's going to be more fair and it's going to be more participative for people, but it doesn't necessarily work in that way. And there has been research that looked at that and found that you have inequalities in the way that distributed leadership works. And there are a lot of challenges in making it work effectively in schools as in other organisations for the core purpose of that organisation. So in developing the tool set and shaping what we put into that, we were very mindful of the problems that people face in developing truly distributed leadership that works for equity and learning. So to reinforce the point, how we refer to this tool set and the work within it is that it is about distributed leadership for equity and learning, or DLE for short, rather than distributed leadership. So it's a consistent thing that we try and say, this is about distributed leadership for equity and learning, or DLE. There's a lot of work on distributed leadership. What makes this distinctive is that it is about a particular kind of distributed leadership. So briefly now, I'm just going to summarise what we mean by DLE. And there are three aspects to it. The first is that it's about leadership which is enacted by everyone in the school. As I mentioned earlier, the point is that lots of people within an organisation, formally or informally, contribute to its leadership. The point here is that this becomes an understanding of the organisation that everyone in some way contributes to leadership, and that it's important to be aware that they can and do this, that everybody in the organisation, in the school, understands that they can play a part in leadership, and that's welcomed and understood. The second defining feature is that it works for inclusive, holistic learning. So what makes it distributed leadership for equity and learning is that we articulate the values that are integral to distributed leadership, that it's about inclusion, it's about involving people in a supportive way, it's about being aware that some people may be left out if you don't ask searching questions about who is involved and who is not involved and why. And it's also about holistic learning in the sense that this is not just about achieving narrow measures of success that are important in some league tables or some narrow measures of performance. It has a broader focus. And so it's important that that's actually articulated and made clear within an understanding of distributed leadership. The third defining feature is based on a recognition that leadership isn't only about what people do, it's also about the supporting institutional structures, the culture, the relationships of the organisation. And for distributed leadership for equity and learning to be working well, it needs a certain set of features, a participatory culture in which it is understood that leadership is invited from everyone, encouraged from everyone, and valued from everyone. Secondly, that it has enabling institutional structures. That is, there are ways in which leadership and innovation are supported, whether that's enabling working groups to be set up so that teachers and students and support staff can work together on innovations, or widening the membership of committees, or creating certain roles such as teacher leadership roles or student leadership roles. There are many, many ways in which it can be done. And there is no one set way of doing that. It depends on the context of the school. But resources are also important that support and enable different people within the school, students, teachers, support staff, to take part in leadership, to take forward innovations, to evaluate innovations, and so on. And the third aspect there is an open social environment. Essentially what we mean by that is that it is a social environment where the contribution of everybody is equally valued. It's understood that people have different things to bring. They're valued for themselves. They're valued for what is distinctive about what they bring to the school. And that relationships can be created across traditional boundaries, whether that's departments or across the hierarchy, in the pursuit of improving learning and making the school better at what it does. There aren't those artificial barriers. There isn't people standing on ceremony because they hold a certain status within the school. People get on with working together. That's the idea behind it. Now, what I want to do now is to show you, and to close really, with one of the video slides that supports the tool set. I'm just going to bring that up so that you can see it.
This video explains what we mean by the term distributed leadership for equity and learning, or DLE for short. We discussed what features are crucial to DLE in a school context. The metaphor of a tree is used to illustrate the complex interaction of elements which support the development of DLE. The image reminds us that DLE needs to be rooted in well-prepared ground. Equally, in order to bear fruit, it needs to be nurtured. It may not flourish immediately, but with time and attention, can grow strong. DLE is leadership that is enacted by everyone in the school and works to promote inclusive, holistic learning. Three features are crucial to DLE. Firstly, it is not only senior school leaders, such as head teachers and principals, who exercise leadership. Everyone, students, teachers, and support staff, is able to contribute to leadership and to take action that improves the work of the school. Leadership emerges from the interactions that take place across the school between people. DLE recognises that leadership is likely to be better where people understand the part they can play in leadership and are valued, empowered, and trusted to innovate and work as co-leaders. Secondly, DLE puts the values of social justice and democratic citizenship at its core. It makes equity an explicit part of the purpose of distributed leadership. Thirdly, to create DLE, a school needs a certain type of culture, institutional structures, and relationships. It needs a participatory culture that sees leadership as emergent from across the school. A participatory culture values leadership from all parts and levels of the school. Core values expressing commitment to equity are made explicit, with the aim of reflecting them in the everyday life of the school. These core values are about inclusive participation and about helping each person to develop as a whole human being and a confident, independent-minded member of the school community. In a school characterised by DLE, there are enabling institutional structures that support leadership from across all parts of the organisation. For example, resources may be allocated which enables staff and students to implement innovative ideas. There may be forums through which to share ideas, or working groups which bring together different people relevant to an initiative. Schools where there is DLE also have an open social environment in which people are valued for what they individually bring to the work of the organisation. Relationships are readily created between people across the formal hierarchy and across other boundaries, such as those between departments or between teachers and students. An open social environment gives people a sense of freedom and energy. This allows them to share ideas, to work with new people, and to provide constructive feedback about new and existing practices. This video has given you some idea of what we mean by distributed leadership for equity and learning. In our next video, we look at why we believe DLE is worth developing.
As is suggested by that video, there are others associated with the tool set. I'm just showing you that one to share, give an idea of what supports the tool set. With that, I will conclude my presentation. If anybody would like to know more about our ideas or about the tool set or any of the work that underpins it, do please get in touch. And obviously, during the seminar, I'm very happy to take questions.
Hello, welcome back everyone. Thank you, Philip, for this really wonderful presentation. And you could notice that we needed a few seconds to change the settings. So now you can hear me, hopefully. Okay, so thank you again for Philip. And I would like to introduce now our next presenters. And very soon I will give the floor to Tanja Westfall-Greiter and Meyer Schratz. Firstly, I would like to introduce Tanja. Tanja Westfall-Greiter is an American who has lived and worked in Austria for over 20 years. She is currently co-director of the National Center for Learning Schools, which is commissioned by the Ministry of Education to support the school reform process, New Middle School in Austria. She has worked closely with Meyer Schratz for several years, in particular in a longitudinal study on student learning at the University of Innsbruck and in regards to education reform and policy in Austria. And Tanja will hold the presentation together with Meyer Schratz. And before I introduce him, I would like to add that Meyer is in quite a challenging situation as he is sitting actually in a train. And we really hope that his internet will have enough power. Dr. Meyer Schratz is Professor of Education at the Department of Teacher Education and School Research, University of Innsbruck, Austria, and is presently Dean of the Faculty of Education. His professional interests are in educational innovation and change, with a particular focus on leadership, quality development, and self-evaluation. He is an Austrian representative for international cooperation, such as EU, the European Network on Teacher Education Policies, or OECD. He is the scientific co-director of the Austrian Leadership Academy. He has been involved in a research project on educational leadership and policy development, and his publications have been translated into several languages. So now you are going to listen and see a presentation about a case study. So I really hope that you are with us, and I give the floor to Tanja and Michael, and please start speaking when you see that your micro is unmuted.
Okay, so I'm going to give it just a minute in order to make sure that the audio is working. And now I think it has probably begun working. So Michael, are you present? Just to check, are you there online?
I'm just in the car and trying to find a place where I can stop and talk, which will be in a couple of minutes. If you start...
Okay, I'll begin, and we're looking forward to bringing you in when you've stopped in the car. Fine. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for attending. We're going to take a look briefly at teacher leadership as a piece of shared leadership or distributed leadership. And in particular, based on our case study for Austria, we're going to look at teacher leadership as a strategy for establishing equity in learning as the theory of action in schools. This has been a key component of our school reform in the lower secondary area. And we'd like to give you a little background to that. The context in which our case study is based on is the Austrian lower secondary school reform, and here you can get an idea of the number of schools and the time plan. G1 stands for Generation 1, and as you can see, we just began in this school year working with Generation 7, and by the end of 2018-19, we will have all of the lower secondary schools in Austria in the compulsory part of the system through the transformation. Although we all know that implementation doesn't mean that what is happening, that actually, Phil, the way you said it was good for us as well. You can't really implement these things. You can try to support transformation processes perhaps at the school level. And we would like to pose this question actually for discussion today, and that is, can we position equity in learning as a theory of action, both on the school level in the sense that Phil was exploring with us distributed leadership for equity, but also on the system level in terms of what we're doing here. Recent OECD publications in the ILE project, which we were a part of actually, really focus on the idea of dynamic systems that are able to further innovation and continuously redesign. And this cycle of redesign requires learning leadership. In fact, the last publication of the ILE project focused on leadership for 21st century learning. But not only learning leadership, as well, we're looking at teacher learning and learner voice. And I think that Phil's presentation brought in all of those pieces really effectively. Under the assumption, and I think this is an important assumption for the equity piece, that one size fits no one. And so how can we deal with that diversity and complexity without trying to reduce it or even hide the complexity that is there? The theory of action for
this is where I could come in.
Yes, perfect, and you're there. I'm glad you're there, Michael, because the theory of action is actually, you're very much responsible for that. So could you guide us through that?
Yeah, well, the problem we had, having been involved in teacher education for a long time, we realized that there was always an argument what was good teaching, what was bad teaching, but this did not really contribute to equity. So we tried to get a switch over from the teacher's end of teaching and learning more to the learner's end, which we call the mindfulness of learning, and trying to get this perspective in to make teachers more sensitive to what is the effect of what they are doing. The second thing we experienced, what Phil touched on and Tanja already mentioned, that when we do systems change, that we can't really just disseminate findings. If we want to get mindfulness of learning into the system, people have to become aware themselves what it means to undergo this transformation, which it really is, because it does something and is not something you just deliver. And that, of course, brings us to the challenge of how you can mobilize and generate knowledge. And of course, we have the challenge that we need robust theoretical knowledge, but on the other hand, it has to become the ownership of the teachers or the professional communities in the schools. And this is where we get back to the complexity, which we cannot reduce. We have to deal with it, but in a constructive and productive way. Over to you, Tanja.
Great, thank you for that. So this was what the thinking was behind a theory of action for the Austrian reform, which was a pilot initially. And we, at that point, under the leadership of Michael Schratz and Wilfried Schley, with myself and Christoph Hofbauer and the team, we decided that teacher leadership would be an important piece of that. So it became an intervention and a strategy. Now, teacher leadership is a little bit different from the world and culture that Phil was describing. The reason why we decided to start with this piece is because we felt that it wouldn't be possible to go overnight from a relatively flat hierarchy with leadership connected to the person who had the function of school head teacher or principal, that we needed to first initially work with colleagues and actually bring in those people who are recognized as particularly effective teachers and position them in leadership positions. And we're linking this also to one way that John Hattie has, in the meantime, articulated that. What he points out is that half of our teachers are very effective, but that also means that the other half aren't. And so we need a profession where we acknowledge those who are especially effective and esteem them and privilege them so that we can use them to the benefit of development in the entire school. One of the critical points is if we do add a layer of hierarchy here, but on the other hand, we are seeing that that is moving then towards getting everyone in the school ready for sharing leadership together. So here's how we have defined teacher leadership, and I'm not going to read it aloud to you. I'm going to give you a few seconds to read it for yourselves. I'd like to focus then on the last point there, breaking rank, because by implementing teacher leadership, we actually broke a structure. We broke through at least a structure in a long tradition of a flat hierarchy. And in the meantime, we've been working with these two metaphors and one big question: how can we foster teacher leadership? You may know these metaphors. The first one is the egg carton culture. Dan Lortie described in his relatively broad sociological study from the 70s called The School Teacher. In 2002, in the introduction to the new edition, he claims that not much has changed. And he describes here the fact that teachers are isolated. They're like eggs in a carton. They don't really touch one another, and each of them does their own thing. In the 90s, Daniel Duke, who's done a lot on teacher leadership, came up with the crab bucket culture. As a child, I went crab collecting. I know what that means. You don't need to put a cover on the bucket because crabs have this wonderful behavior. When one crab tries to crawl out, the others pull it back down. And both of these metaphors actually cause a lot of resonance when we're working with teachers here. They recognize these pictures in their own schools and in their own experience. So how can we foster teacher leadership with this type of established culture? And one of our ways of doing that has been to work with the so-called land designers, which is the name for this new teacher leadership role that we've started here. They have a 2-year blended learning program, which is worth 12 ECTS, so credits, that actually can go towards continuing their education to acquire a master's degree. The focus in the curriculum there is on equity and excellence, and also we do a great deal of work on their roles and the process of role-taking and role-making. In addition, the other piece there is that even when they're finished with their qualification program, they remain connected to one another online. Our platform is very active in the closed area for just land designers to meet and contact one another, to develop things together. We have an average of about 2,000 accesses per week, so active access hits per week. So it gives you an idea of how active this community is. About 1/3 is very, very active, and the rest of them are passively active for the most part, but there's a strong community there that helps support them in their roles. Just this week, we had a new forum thread about, is it the job of a land designer to take on administrative responsibilities to reduce the work level of the school principal? And the answer, of course, was no. So we're working in the entire system of trying to adapt to what is teacher leadership. And in this process over the last years, since 2008, we've been developing tools basically because we needed them in order to establish teacher leadership with the long-term goal of a full participatory culture at each school. And one of those tools, Michael, if you're still here, it would be great if you could talk about it.
Here, because we noticed it was very difficult to see the teacher switching from one context to the other, because they thought they had been trained to be teachers and do that as best as they can. But then this is fair enough working in the system, but when we had a more systemic approach according to this system-wide change process, forming learning designers, they also had to learn how to work with the system and use their system, their microsystem of the classroom, with the mesosystem of the school to work with the macro system. And at the same time, and this would be the third context, as a teacher leader to work on the system, to see how you can move on the system and not just do what you are supposed to do. And this brings the leadership role into the teaching and the teacher's professional experience.
This was the first tool that we developed. It continues to be a very important one as teacher leaders begin to switch contexts and learn to do that. A couple of other tools that are available in the tool set from Austria and the EPNoSL project is P groups, which are actually the beginnings of working in PLCs and professional learning communities. And another tool is, remember that point about breaking ranks? Well, the teacher leaders will irritate their colleagues because we're not used to having someone break ranks. And so one of the ways that we ask them to think about their planned activities is to think about it on a spectrum of irritation, from I'm attracting attention by doing this to I'm starting to cause resistance in others if I do this. And these are really important or useful reflection tools for teacher leaders in Austria. So we're at the end already of our presentation, and Michael, we've thought about quite a few questions here for discussion, and we are hoping there will be some discussion. Could you say a bit about these questions that we've posed?
Yeah, the thing is, relating again to the different contexts, working in the system, with the system, and on the system, it brought some aspects in which you just touched, Tanja, how to deal constructively with irritation, because irritations usually used to be a kind of interruption of what they were meant to do, rather than using this as a change process and a signal or as an incubation phase for change, so to speak. And then we touched the aspect of complexity, which we are still struggling. And for myself, how we can use the learning theory of action as one which really tries to enhance equity in the system, and how can it be articulated? And over to you, Tanja, to wind up.
Yeah, and some other questions that we have are, how can we leverage highly effective teachers to help all teachers make the difference that they all want to make? I think that the idea of an open social system is a long-term vision for us, but on the way there, we need to also learn in a culture how to honor excellence and esteem that, and also how to position those who have achieved excellence to support others. So how can we do that in the sense of, this is my contribution, and tomorrow what's going to be yours? That's a big question for us. Also, what structures, roles, tools, and routines enable transformation? And a part of that question that's implied is, which ones hinder transformation and therefore need to be put out of commission, to be decommissioned? And finally, how can we be mindful of learning in all aspects of the system? I think this mindfulness of learning, which also means being aware of the fact that each individual has his or her own personal experience here. I can't learn for others, they have to learn for themselves. This is a key piece of equity as well, but how can we foster that mindfulness? So those are our questions. We thank you for listening, and we're most looking forward to questions, discussion. And so it's over and back to you, Adele.
Thank you, Tanja and Michael.
Hello.
This was really a very interesting presentation. And before I hand over to our moderators, I would like to go back to our welcome slide, because I saw that some new participants joined our webinar and maybe they didn't find how to connect to audio. So first of all, you have to connect to audio, click on this button, and then click on call using computer. So please make sure that you are connected. So I really hope that newcomers can hear us as well. So, and now it's time for the discussion, and I would like to introduce our two moderators. One of the moderators is Jens Bolhöfer. For 10 years, Jens Bolhöfer worked at the NLQ, which is the State Institute for School Quality Development in Lower Saxony in Germany, where he was responsible for international educational affairs. Amongst other projects, he coordinated the European Network Leadership in Education. He now works for the Ministry of Education in Lower Saxony and is responsible for the development of curricula as well as for modern languages. The other moderator is Wolfgang Meyer. Wolfgang Meyer has been a long-time staff member of NLQ, and in its predecessor organizations, he has been involved in the development and coordination of numerous international and European educational cooperation projects under the umbrella of the Lower Saxony State Institute and the German international schools in Mexico City and in Lisbon. He has been working in the area of school leadership since 2008, when the NLQ coordinated the Communist Network Leadership in Education. So now I really would like to encourage you to write your questions in the chat, and I give the floor to Jens and Wolfgang.
Okay, thank you, Adele, for this introduction. And thank you, Tanja and Michael, for delivering lots of questions already, and I would suggest that we start with questions and a discussion of the last presentation, because it's just in a line. We have not received so many questions so far in the chat, and as we are not too many people here, I would suggest that we allow questions to be answered in the chat and as well directly in video once we have worked on these questions. I invite now all participants to ask their questions.
Well, Nora has already put in some questions there. I think what really has been new is the cooperation between school leaders and teacher leaders, which has really made it easier for the school head to concentrate more on his overall perspective and pass on the challenges of new changes in teaching and learning through teachers and forming professional learning communities, which didn't used to be the case beforehand in Austrian schools, especially with the challenge suddenly not having any external streaming anymore because they had the whole bunch of students. And Tanja might add some perspectives from her own experience at the front side.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Michael's assessment just was. In addition to that, we have noticed that, partly because we're guiding it as well and encouraging it, that school leadership teams, it's becoming more and more distributed, let's just describe it that way. School leadership teams are now identifying teachers on the faculty and staff who have already for a long time been playing leadership roles. They've been leading innovation and change, but they've also been leading in other ways that were supportive for providing an open culture or a supportive culture at school. And now, all of a sudden, these extra contributions from these people are being recognized, and that's having a positive impact. Another aspect which kind of fits in, especially Nora, with the big question about the implementation of policy, it's still a baby policy. In other words, at the moment now, the teacher unions have become very much aware of these new roles. And I would say because of effective role-taking and role-making on the part of the individuals who call themselves land designers, we now have this role on the agenda for labor union negotiations, because the question about how they are paid for this additional work is still an open question on the national level. We have two provinces who have led that, and one province is separately funding with provincial money 2 hours per week to free these teachers from their teaching, so that they can work in their teacher leadership role. Another province is funding it with 1 hour a week. But there are very different models, and there's certainly no standard model. And so what we're doing here is adding new professional facets to the teaching profession. So that's kind of exciting.
May I add a supplementary question, Tanja?
Yeah.
When I look at the second slide and the different generations of school reforms in Austria, since when is teacher leadership and equity and excellence in the focus of these reforms?
Well, equity and excellence was the whole point at the very beginning when we did a big pilot for the reform, and Michael was much more involved in that. So, Michael, I'm going to throw the ball to you, because you were the one who actually came up with this name land designer, as I recall. So can you pick it up from there, how we got started and where we are?
Yes, that's, we come back to the egg box and crab metaphor, because in Austria, like in German-speaking countries, usually in general, all teachers were equal more or less, and everybody was expected to do the same. And we said this might be a hindrance for equity and excellence purposes, and through this new political decision to do away with streaming, it was necessary to be more flexible, more diverse, more differentiated in the approach, and it brought in this theoretical perspective, being more mindful of learning, which of course tries to be more just of the students, but which was the starting point actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, more questions.
I think we have some more questions referring to the DLE, so we should bring Philip in.
Yeah.
Philip, can you see the questions? Or?
Yeah, I can see a couple of questions. There's one there about whether the tool set has been tested in any way through discussions with some school leaders and teachers. And parts of the tool set certainly have been used with head teachers, for example, and we've got feedback on the tool set from a variety of people. One of the challenges with this tool set has been to make it as simple as possible so that it can be used in a very wide variety of contexts, because the tool set is supposed to be relevant to people across Europe. So that's quite a challenge. And what we've tried to do in the tool set is set up exercises that act as a starting point for people to use. So school leaders or policymakers can use them as a starting point for people to explore what it is that they want to do in their own context and setting. Another question that was there was about cultural context, whether that's important, whether that affects how you can implement DLE, and that certainly is true. The question also referred to the role of the school leader, the head teacher or principal, and a key thing in a lot of the research and experience about distributed leadership, and certainly this applies to DLE too, is that the school leader and senior leaders have a role in developing a community within the school so that people understand what is happening, that they participate in the change that's occurring. It was interesting, Tanja and Michael, when you referred to some people being resistant or irritated by teacher leaders. That suggests that we need also to think about the context of the school as a wider community, and who is being involved and who is understanding what is happening and who perhaps is not being involved in that. Yeah. And the last point that I would just sort of make in response to the discussion, it's interesting, I think, that there are two differences or two different ways of approaching distributed leadership, at least two ways. But what I want to highlight is that one route is where you create new formal leadership roles, like those of a teacher leader, a particular role. Another model is that you don't create new formal roles, but you have a widespread sort of informal understanding, as it were, or a non-formal understanding that lots of people are involved in leadership, but they don't necessarily take on specified formal roles. And that has its advantages, it has its disadvantages too, but I think it's something that's worth considering and debating, and how people respond to it will depend on their own particular cultural context too.
Yes, I've been nodding while you were talking, Phil. I totally agree with that. Another tool in our tool set, which is I think just being put up now online, is an analysis of potential in the entire staff. And it's looking at who are the people who particularly carry our relationships, who are those who keep us going there, who are those who carry the vision, who are those who primarily are making contribution to professionalization. And it's not that everyone has to do the same thing, but that we recognize that everyone is important here, everyone has something important to contribute, and what have we maybe even been blind to? We haven't recognized that they're doing that. And we feel quite good about that at this phase in the school reform after working in this area since 2008 now, partly because we saw in the first few years that suddenly people were becoming aware of the fact about how some teachers had been making important contributions in leadership ways to the success of the school for a long time. And what has grown at the same time is dissatisfaction or an unwillingness to tolerate anyone in the community, and when I say community here, I mean primarily the school staff, who is not making an active contribution. So those are all delicate things. But we see them growing, and I would absolutely underscore what you've said here about the idea of community also in a more expanded sense. We're just getting started there in Austria. There's an initiative that's across several ministries, and because of that, it's maybe not as strong as it could be, called Lifelong Learning 2020, and they're looking at how can we bring learning into the entire community. Equity isn't in that government initiative, but learning is. And so we're just now breaking down a little bit the traditional school walls in terms of where we are in Austria.
And just one brief question. How much money do you bring in to make this process work?
Are you asking in Austria?
Yes.
Do you mean money into the schools, or where do you mean money there?
No, for qualification, for networking.
Okay. In the pilot years, the first 3 years that was funded by the ministry, there was an extra budget for this qualification program. And in the meantime now, since the mandate went through, we are now sharing those costs with the Pädagogische Hochschulen, so the organizations here that are partly responsible for teacher education, but also most importantly for continuing professional development. And so we're sharing the costs. Until the rollout is complete, the government is covering half of those costs, and the Pädagogische Hochschulen are covering the other half. And that model seems to be working, even though we're in a period of budget restrictions right now.
I'm taking up Dagmora's question about the initiatives to implement distributed leadership for equity in learning in schools. In Germany, for example, in Lower Saxony, there is one option for secondary schools. They can opt for an extended school leadership team in their school, but this means more organization, more conferences, and so this is not put into practice in too many schools. I can't name a figure, but it's somewhere below 20%. The other question that I would like to ask to Philip was, in the context of accountability, you mentioned the pressure that is put on the school heads and on teachers deriving from large-scale things like PISA, etc. Isn't there a similar pressure from politics that is either in favor or not in favor of introducing more distributed leadership in the schools?
Yeah, very good question. Again, it links to the context of particular schools. In the UK, a school which has been deemed to be doing very badly by the inspection office and is not doing very well by the measures that are used to track schools' performance, can find it very difficult to make changes and build in a distributed leadership system because they're under a great deal of pressure. Other schools that are in different kind of contexts and deemed to be doing very well, there is often more leeway for them to develop a leadership culture that is more open, more distributed. But these are not sort of hard and fast rules and iron laws, as it were. We know from a lot of work that where schools are being asked or told to turn around, that they're often led in a very autocratic way at the beginning, but then head teachers begin to introduce more distributed ways of leadership. So I think that links with Dangwoli's question, which is about who initiates. Very often it is the head teacher or principal, the school leader that does that. I think policy has a role in creating conditions where there is an encouragement to towards distributed leadership. And the policy can create conditions where it's understood that this is a valuable and good way of doing things. The question, a key question that's related to all of this, is sustainability of distributed leadership. We were talking to a head teacher a little while ago in the UK, and they had now left the school where they were head teacher, and that school, whereas had been run in a very distributed way, under a new head teacher was being run in a very different way. And I think we have to think very carefully about who is able to carry forward a culture of distributed leadership that it's quite difficult to create, but very easy to lose. It's quite a fragile thing. And I think somehow the governing bodies of schools, other stakeholders of schools also, it's helpful if they understand the value of distributed leadership for equity and learning and are willing to support ways in which that can be introduced or enhanced or sustained and carried forward.
Well, I had a question for Philip as well. What is the difference between distributed leadership and participatory leadership?
Thank you. Distributed leadership is one of those terms that shared leadership, democratic leadership, and so on. I think my answer would be, well, how is the person that's using the concept participatory leadership using that term? If it's about sort of consulting people and listening to people, then that is a style of leadership. Distributed leadership is more than that, in that it actually involves empowering a variety of people to take initiatives. So distributed leadership for equity and learning is about a system, a school community, in which people feel that they're able to do things, to take things forward, to have ideas and actually implement them, not in an anarchic way, just people doing whatever they want regardless of what each other is doing, but within a culture where it's understood why they're doing things, what they're aiming at, and where they're encouraged to talk to other people and work with other people in order to move things forward. So distributed leadership is a much deeper thing. And in the end, I think distributed leadership for equity and learning is a much more democratic way of doing things in the richest sense of understanding the word democracy. It's about participation, yes, but inclusion. It's about asking difficult questions about who's involved and not involved. And it's about a learning experience that takes place through all of that, including students in the fullest sense. Distributed leadership for equity and learning involves students, and when they're being involved, when they're taking initiatives, when they're participating, they are also learning in a rich and deep way.
Thank you.
Powerful visions. Okay, I have been unmuted. I see. This is Tanja again. Those are very powerful visions that Philip has just described. When I think about it in the context in which we are in Austria, I would say that is happening in some of our schools, but I would describe those schools more as boutique solutions. So on the one hand, what they've developed at their schools isn't something that
Yeah. Hello? Anyone speaking?
Hello?
Hi. Well, looking at the question, has it been measured? To measure leadership is always a challenge, you know. We know the saying, leadership is like beauty, you know it when you see it. It's very difficult in the short time when we started this, but what we definitely see, Tanja was mentioning, for example, the discourses going on all over Austria between people involved talking about teaching and particularly learning and how they can achieve their goal. I think this can be measured by the number of people who have been involved. If we want to see the effects in the testing results, that will take, of course, longer than that. But it's a tricky thing to measure that within such a short time. We are just happy to see things happening to start with, because that has been a very important step to achieve throughout the whole system. Over to you, Wolfgang.
Philip, you wanted to say something about Nora's question.
Yes, very briefly, a response to that question. I was involved in a project a few years ago, a research project that looked at collaboration between schools, and it is very difficult to measure the impact of a great deal of complex collaboration, in this instance between schools, between head teachers and in schools, between teachers in different schools and students visiting different schools. It was a kind of distributed leadership, certainly very collaborative, very cooperative, but we wanted to try and measure the impact of that over a very short period, 3.5 years, which is very short. The upshot was that what we were able to gather from qualitative and quantitative evidence was that there was some evidence that that kind of collaboration between and across schools did help all students, but particularly those more disadvantaged students. And I thought that was a very interesting finding, that it means it's worth looking at ways of assessing the impact of collaboration and distributed leadership over a lengthy period of time to see how that is done and how that's replicated.
Thank you, Philip. Since there are a lot of soft factors involved in this issue, I think we will need another HETI study in about 10 years' time to measure the impact. Are there any other questions from the group? There is only time for one more question, because in 2 minutes the conference will be over.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had a question for Philip. I cannot understand very well how it works.
Yeah, just speak. We can hear you well.
Now my question is about the issue of culture of distributed leadership. And I wanted to ask Philip what kind of aspects he thinks are the more critical, the more delicate and crucial in order to create a culture of distributed leadership and then to make sure that it is sustainable.
Right.
Doing the research, I mean.
Yeah. Thank you, Giovanna. There are a number of factors that have been found to be crucial. I've just mentioned one or two of them. One is that you need to develop and work out a shared understanding within the organisation, within the school, about what direction it's going in with regard to leadership, and that needs people to participate in that. It needs careful planning as well. It's not a case of just, well, we'll do this, we'll sort out what we understand by distributed leadership for equity and learning, and then we'll start it next week. It requires thinking through, well, what are the different roles of people, or what kind of working groups might there be and what are their roles, or whatever is being done in that particular context. The sort of instrumental support, the institutional supports need to be thought through quite carefully as well. And the way that that is done, how that's done, if it involves people so that people understand and people can raise questions that are of concern to them, then you have a chance of moving forward and creating a culture or a climate in which people develop a trust for each other, that they understand how they can work together, and that it can move forward over time. And that's another aspect, that it takes time how to do that. I was at one of the schools that has a very developed system of action groups involving students. Students can form a working group to do anything that they feel needs to be done within the school, whether that's decorating the school or whether it's about the curriculum. And it's a different way of thinking about how you involve students, not a student council, but students able to set up working groups that they're involved in. And the students understood it, and they were very enthusiastic about it. What they said was, and what some of the staff confirmed there, was that it took a lot longer for the teaching staff, the adults, to understand that new kind of way of doing things. People have to be brought into it. People have to have a chance to understand it and try it out and reflect on it. And of course, things don't always go right, so things need to be improved over time as well. So you're creating a much more participative, involving, dialogic community, a community that talks to each other and raises difficult questions and attempts to deal with them over a long period of time. It has to be sustained, because it's not something that you create all of a sudden. And the final thing I just emphasize is the importance of keeping a direction, a focus on the core purpose of the school, which is learning. And learning by students, learning by teachers, learning by support staff too. And so what we understand by learning is also very important, because that is what guides and is there at the centre of everything that's done. Then it has a chance of gaining the enthusiasm of people.
Okay, thank you, Philip. I would like to sum up in a very short way. I think we are under time pressure. Thanks all the presenters, Tanja, Michael, Philip, for your contributions, and thanks for all those who participated in the discussion. Please fill in the questionnaire of the evaluation of this webinar.
Which you can access from the chat.
You can access it from the chat. I would like to point out to the distributed leadership tool set, which you can access at the School Leadership EU website. There is more additional information on it. Thank you, Philip, for your readiness to answer mails, and I think that this applies to Tanja and Michael as well. We have some participants obviously from Portugal and Spain. Boas festas, Feliz Navidad, and this is what I would like to say in the end. Have a good time until Christmas, and have a good